Good evening, and I hope that I'm live. Yeah, I see the little red button. It looks like I'm live. If you're out there, if you're in the comment section, feel free. Let me know what you thought about my little introduction. Because the song Who Are You, sung by the famous band The Who, is most famous to this generation because of television. CSI Miami, CSI what? Las Vegas. I don't know. I think for every state, there's pretty much a CSI. Hi, Dr. Nikki. How are you? Hey, legend. So, what I wanted to talk about is the problem with the CSI effect. And the CSI effect is most people in modern times, when there is a criminal charge and there's a trial, especially if the crime is violent, people are expecting physical evidence. People are expecting forensics. And when I tried to watch CSI Miami, I actually saw a detective who was standing there saying nothing while scientists asked people questions and interrogated suspects. And I think back to forensic files. Scientists, if you think about it, most scientists are very quiet and reserved people. Most of us cannot name the scientists who worked on anything in our daily lives because scientists usually don't seek fame. And when a scientist seeks fame, for instance, when you watch an old episode of Forensics Files and you see a scientist saying, I was so happy to catch the crook, that's a red flag. Just a second. The yard is being mowed. So Fur Baby he's got something to say about it. Somebody's on his property. Anyway, so who I wanted to talk about, one of the people that I wanted to talk about is an ex-chemist named Annie Dukem. And if you've seen Netflix's to fix a drug scandal, then you're probably familiar with Annie Dukem. And Annie Dukem, most people will say they have no idea why she did what she did. And what she did was she falsified results in a drug lab that she worked in. Well, there are emails from Annie Dukem to detectives. Sorry. There are emails from Annie Dukem, I'm sorry, not to detectives, but to a prosecutor. And Annie's talking about how great it is to help get the bad guy. Well, see, Annie's not a scientist. And when I worked appellate law, and in particular wrongful convictions, I learned that who performs who performs a test from anything from a DUI to a fingerprint matters. It matters because a lot of it, for instance, there's not a lot of difference in your fingerprint and your brother's fingerprint, your fingerprint and your daughter's fingerprint. And at the end of the day, that's a human being that's looking through a microscope and making a decision. That's a human being that's operating the breathalyzer machine that's given that DUI test. And so it matters who this human being is, and it matters what they know. And it matters if the scientist feels like he or she is part of the prosecution. So Annie Dukem is also an overachiever. She lies about her background. She's talking about being a part-time student at Harvard in a science program. The program didn't even exist. But by all means, she was a bright woman. And one of her coworkers, Annie had earned the nickname Superwoman because she could process the evidence that would come in from police 2 and 3 times faster than the best chemist in the lab. So if these people processed 3,000 samples, in a year. She processed 9,000. And there are coworkers who did get suspicious. And I read that a coworker got suspicious, and what Annie was doing, and checked and went behind Annie to check something that she had tested positive for cocaine, and it was table salt. So what would happen is the police go in, the police, see a substance, and they take it to the lab, and the police will actually put on a card what they think it is, just from eyesight. Look, marijuana, cocaine. Now I can tell you, working for defense counsel, we appreciate it if police didn't even do that. So what you have is dry labbing. And what Annie would do is, if the cops came in and said it was heroin or cocaine, she would just eye it. She would eye it. And it's heroin, it's cocaine. Well, of course, other than Massachusetts having to eventually overturn thousands of convictions, there was a man that was wrongfully convicted because Annie testified that he had cocaine. I mean, that he had heroin when it wasn't heroin. So Annie would also skip procedural steps. So there's a calibration tool that chemists in the lab would use. And this calibration tool is important because if that calibration tool says heroin 13.9, heroin 14, that could be the difference in years in a prison sentence. And so a coworker caught her skipping, using these tools, and she got caught forging a supervisor's initials. Eventually, right, the supervisor, and he was reported, the employee said the supervisor, quote, poo-pooed him, right? So no big deal. Eventually, Annie got caught with 90 unsigned samples. And the samples, you know what I mean, you need a standard if you're going to test a drug to see if you're going to test a substance to see if it's a drug. And so she got caught with 90 unsigned samples. And what Annie was doing was she would do the preliminary and she would dry lab it, which she denied doing later on, which is not testing it at all. And the check procedure was somebody else would come along and retest it. Well, if it came back and said that it was something different from what Annie said it was, she would actually go and get whatever drug she said it was and replace it so that it would come back to the drug. So if you were up, if the police had kicked in your door and accused you of having a drug and it went in front of Annie, it was whatever the police said it was going to be. And I mean, just think about 90 unsigned samples. So what's going on is when she forges the supervisor's initials, she's messing with the chain of custody. And the chain of custody of evidence is something that defense teams are all over like white on rice. So the Massachusetts, the Massachusetts governor's office decides to look into this chain of custody issue. And Annie had already resigned after she got caught with those, 90 with those 90 unsigned, with those 90 samples that hadn't been signed out. And at the same time, what's going on is a man by the name of Melendez Diaz. He had been tried and convicted on a drug charge, and he did not work on his case. But what he did when he appealed was he said that his Sixth Amendment rights to confronting a witness have been violated because the lab technician who tested the drug in his case should have had to testify. And the Supreme Court actually agreed with him. And how does that affect Annie, right? By the time I went to law school, the technician had to testify. And it's because of this 2009 Supreme Court decision. Well, now all of a sudden, technicians have to be in court a lot more. And all of Massachusetts, all of their technicians' productivity goes down because they have to be in court all of a sudden to testify. I tested this substance. This is how I tested it. This is my educational background. This substance came back to be marijuana, heroin, whatever. Well, by the time the governor learns about the chain of custody issues, they see that Annie's productivity is still 3 times that of her coworkers. And I guess that you can test a lot of drug samples if you're not actually testing them. I guess it would take no time at all. So listen, what's the fallout from Annie Dukem? She pleads guilty to 27 counts of perjury, tampering with evidence, obstruction of justice. There were people who were convicted that Annie didn't even work on their case, and their cases were overturned. People who were convicted of running meth labs. So not only did innocent people go to prison, but a lot of bad people got out of prison. So I think Annie cost the state $30 million minimally, and thousands in overturned convictions. And so the second chemist that I want to talk about is Sonia Farrak. And what is crazy about Sonia Farrak is her coworker said that they had no idea that she had a drug problem, that up until the months before she was fired, that her work was meticulous. And I think that that is a lie. I think that that's a lie. Sonia Farrak said the first time she worked for the Massachusetts drug lab for 9 years. And she said that the first time she did drugs at work, she decided to try meth, that she'd researched it. And she thought, if I'm going to try a drug, it's going to be this drug. She suffered from depression. She tried to commit suicide in high school. She was under the care of a therapist. And fortunately, Sonia Farrak kept a diary. Her therapist had told her to keep a daily diary of her drug use to help try to get to the root of the problem. Well, Sonia Farrak says that she not only smoked crack cocaine at work at the lab, she made crack cocaine at the lab. She did liquid LSD, ketamine, amphetamines, and she was using the standard. So scientists get a standard, and when they test whatever the police bring in, they test it against that standard. Well, the lab all of a sudden runs low on the standard of methamphetamine. And the lab director just orders a second standard, a second set of standards of methamphetamine. She said because it ran low, she moved on to the ketamine. The same day that she said she did crack cocaine daily, daily in the lab. So one day she's caught smoking crack cocaine at work, and she's given a drug test. And of course, she fails the drug test and she's fired. And her coworkers notice that there are some drugs that are missing. So they call the police. The police pull her over. I don't know how candle wax is used to make crack cocaine, but that was part of the candle wax was part of the kit that she had in her car to make crack cocaine. Sonia Farrak, sorry, Sonia Farrak said that not only did she get high daily at work, but that she was high when she testified in drug trials, that she was high when she talked to state police. She said that she got high in the evidence room, she got high in the bathrooms, she got high in the lab. And There is a case of a wrongful conviction. This guy, he says he's gonna try and get over, right? And he's got a cashew. He says it's a cashew, a nut, like a cashew that you eat. And he's pretending it's crack cocaine and he's gonna sell it. Sorry about that. He's got crack cocaine and he's got this cashew. He's gonna sell it as crack cocaine, and it's an undercover officer. And it goes to the drug lab and it comes back as crack cocaine. He's kicking and screaming all the way to his conviction. Another man accused of having heroin, and it was actually a diet drug, but it came back positive for heroin, thanks to Sonia Farrak. And he was on his fifth year in prison by the time Sonia Farrak was caught getting high at the lab. She said that on the day that the guy was convicted of the heroin, she looked in the diary. She said that day she couldn't have worked any of the utensils at that lab because that's just how high she was. She couldn't even drive home. Now the lab director and her coworkers are saying that they did not know that she had a drug problem, and I find that hard to believe. And I'll end with this. When prosecutors found out about Sarah Farrar, one one state's attorney said that it had only been going on for 4 weeks, that this was not a huge case. In fact, it had been going on 9 years. Over 40,000 cases were overturned because of Sonia. I've been calling her Sarah, excuse me, because of Sonia Farrar. So the lead attorney, Ann Kazmarek, she was disbarred. She told defense attorneys who heard that Sonia Farrak, who had been arrested with crack cocaine and fired from the lab, that they were on a fishing expedition, that there was nothing that was exculpatory, meaning there was nothing that could show that their clients were possibly innocent, when in fact Sonia Farrak kept a drug diary every day. So there's 9 years worth of daily drug usage at that lab that she recorded. So I'd like to say this before I go. Thank you, Dr. Nikki. Thank you, Legend. Thank you to those in the clouds. And if you like this video, make sure to hit like, share it. But I'd like to remind people, be careful of the CSI effect. Chemists are scientists. And when they seek fame or when they believe they're part of the prosecution, then we have to question whether or not we're getting an unbiased result. Blood evidence is pretty solid. DNA evidence is pretty solid. But a fingerprint, the testing of a substance to tell whether it's cocaine or whether it's heroin, it matters who the lab technician is, and it matters how that lab is run. What Massachusetts discovered was there was no security in their crime labs. Defense attorneys are arguing for independent labs because a lot of the state labs feel like they're just an arm of the prosecution. They want to feel like they're part of the team, that they help to catch the bad guy, when in reality, their job is to test potential evidence. That's it. So I want to thank everybody for stopping by, and I'll talk to you guys later. Like the video. Have a good night.